Hey, it's Lori Neverman from Common Sense Home. Today we're making up some maple pear jelly. And in this bowl, I have measured out and washed just over 4 pounds of pears. I have actually closer to 5 pounds because some of these were banged up, so there's a number of soft spots that need to be cut out. And to start the prep, all you want to do is quarter these up and cut the cores out and any bad spots, and then put them in the pot to cook down. And in the pot with the pears, you're going to add, oops, better get it in the pot, works better that way, 1 3/4 cups of water. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to trim these all up, clean them up, and then cook them down on medium-low heat. You don't want to scorch your pears. They are really high in sugar, so you want to stir occasionally. And cook them for about 7 to 15 minutes until they're nice and soft and squishy. And then once they're soft and squishy, you want to put them into a jelly strainer or flour sack towel and strain off just the juice, because this is a jelly, not a jam. So we're getting rid of the pulp and skins, which does save time in the prep here because you don't need to skin your pears before you get into this. And I am going to keep up with this and get my way through the rest of the bowl. I cooked our pears until they were nice and mushy and then hit them with a potato masher for good measure. So they are very juicy and the juice easily separates from the pears. And this is a jelly strainer. It's just a specially made little round frame with legs that has a little fabric insert, and you just ladle in your fruit puree or whatever you need to drain. Sometimes I've used this for straining broth too. And you want to ladle in that puree, and you want to end up with 4 cups of juice. And if you're making jelly and you want your jelly to stay clear, you never want to squeeze your bag, your jelly bag, because that will get some of that pulp oozing through the jelly bag, and then you'll get cloudy jelly. I'm going to let that go down just a little bit. And don't overload your jelly bag too much, because it is tied on here, and sometimes they're elasticized. But if you overload it too much, and I have done this, try to fill it up to the top all at once, the weight of the pulp will actually pull down the jelly bag and drop it right into your juice, which is a little messy and counterproductive. So patience is a virtue. Just take it a little bit at a time. And you can see this fruit is so mushy that it's draining pretty darn fast. We're almost up to our 4 cups already. And I will leave this sit here for a while. The original recipe says let it sit for a couple hours, but if it strains out faster, drains out faster, and we are up to our 4 cups, which we are about a 1/4 cup from that, you're good to go. And after this is done, we're going to move over back to the stove. You see this is trying to wiggle its way off. Once we've got our juice ready, we're going to move back to the stove and finish up the jelly. All right, we're ready to move on to the next stage of the jelly making. On the back of my stove here, I have my 2-piece canning lids. If I can grab one. Put lids in the ring. And I've got those gently heating up. You never want to boil them, but I do find that I get better seal rates if I heat them up gently before I assemble them, put them on the jars. In my canner, this has been heating up, and I put my jars in there to sterilize in the canner. And then I have my 4 cups of pear juice. I'm going to add that to the pot. Get my pot going. And to that I'm going to add a 1/4 cup of lemon juice and 4 teaspoons of calcium water. Now, calcium water is made from calcium powder and water, and the calcium powder comes inside the box of Pomona's pectin. Pomona's pectin is a low sugar pectin, and when you open the box, it has two little packets in here. One of them is the pectin, and one of them is the calcium. Just tucked down in here. And to make your calcium water, you mix a half a teaspoon of the calcium powder with, I believe, half a cup of water. I used up the last from my last batch. The instructions are in the packet of pectin. And now I'm going to stir that and bring this to a boil. And you want to keep your canning water hot, because once you're ready, you're going to need that nice and toasty. And then while this is heating up, I have half a cup of maple syrup, and into that I'm going to mix 5 teaspoons of pectin powder. When you're using Pomona's pectin, you always want to mix your sweetener with your pectin before you add it into your fruit or juice. Because if you don't do that, you will very definitely end up with clumps of pectin. Tried it, very bad results. So it's really important not to skip this step. You want to mix that really well to make sure you get rid of any lumps. Set that aside and crank up the heat on this front burner. Give it a stir. And we'll come back in a bit when this is ready to add the sweetener. Our juice mix is bubbling away, so it's time to add the sweetener. Let's get that syrup and pectin mix in here. Give that a good stir. You want to make sure you don't get anything ever cooking down to the bottom. With liquid sweetener like honey or maple syrup, that is, not maple sugar, there's less of a risk because it blends in nicely. But if you have sugar, sometimes that can fall right to the bottom of your pot and then want to scorch. Okay, and get that heat back up. Yummy. And bring this to a full boil for 1 to 2 minutes. And then I just fished my jars out of the canner, so we're ready to fill those up. And this is really yummy looking. It almost looks like a caramel sauce as it's starting to thicken up, because it has that rich color. I'm going to stop stirring for a moment. Yep, we have full boil. I'm going to set the timer. And once you hit that boil, whenever you're working with a sweetener, when you've got a boil, you do not want to step away and leave that, because it will bubble up and also can scorch very easily to the bottom of the pan. So you want to keep your spoon moving around. And whoo-wee, this is bubbling like crazy. You may notice that when you use maple syrup, you get significantly more bubbling action than you do with granulated sugar. This is turning into a volcano in the pot. I don't know if you're catching any of that or not. All right, my timer's gone off, and we are ready to turn this heat off and load it into the jars. Oh. Works better if you have the ladle that I left on the other side of the kitchen. When you're working, oh, hot. Did not burn myself, mind you, but I thought that it was maybe not quite as hot as this, so I'm going to grab a hot pad. But I was going to say, When you're working with canning, you do want to try and keep everything warm, hot. You don't want to have any of your materials cold because that is a boiling pot. So if you had cold jars and you were loading boiling jelly into them, you could easily have those jars crack or explode. And we want to load these up with 1/4 inch head space. And I have a damp cloth here, and wipe around the edges. You want to make sure you don't have any of that jelly around the edge because that'll interfere with the seal. Well, probably the sale too, because if you were trying to sell it, you couldn't do so if it didn't come out of the can correctly. And then, man, I miss my old tongs. My old pair of tongs broke. And they have magnetized jar lifters too, or lid lifters that you can use, but I just use kitchen tongs. And you want to snug that lid on, finger tight, and then that's going to get loaded into the canner. And I'm going to set this aside while I load up the rest of the jars. The jars are filled and ready to load into the canner. And my old stove used to have a high output burner on that corner, which worked out a lot better for me because our microwave is over there and this one's a little hotter. And so it's really awkward to try and fill jars and load the canner on that side. Well, so I'm going to slide, well, I slid the canner over here after I got my jars loaded. And I'm going to get these jars lowered in and cover it up. And I'm going to wait to start my timer for processing until this reaches a full boil. So I've got the heat cranked up. And this will take a couple minutes, but once it reaches a full boil, then these are going to process for 10 minutes. And I'm going to prep the area where they come out for when we're done. My cameraman got called away to take care of something else, so we're jumping ahead a little bit to the next day. When your jars are ready to come out of the canner, you want to prep a cloth on your kitchen counter, like a kitchen towel, or you can use a wooden cutting board, but I generally just use a towel. So you have somewhere to set your jars to protect them from the coolness of the countertop. And use your jar grabber to take your jars out, set them there to cool, and let them rest generally for 8 hours or more. You can leave them for a whole day. I usually let mine sit overnight. You want them completely cool before you prep them for long-term storage. Once your jars are cooled off, you want to remove the rings for storage. You don't want to leave those on because they can potentially have a false seal. And then you want to wipe off if there's any hard water deposits or anything on the top. And then I use a Sharpie marker to label what's in it and the date. And then you want to store these in a cool, dry location out of direct sunlight and use them within 18 months for best quality. And that is that. I hope you enjoy your maple pear jelly. And if you have any questions, leave a comment below.